Oh, okay. Thank you all so very much for indulging in us in this really intense exercise. There was a lot, too much to cover in little time, but I think at least for group 2 there were really rich discussions and already quite a few recommendations on things that we have not considered or should rephrase to make this more useful. I would like to ask if, I see that somebody is still writing. Let's give them a second to finish writing. Olivier, do you need a second to... No? Okay. If you could share the main discussion points.
So the main discussion was basically to say that overall the tool indeed addresses the main issues, which is not surprising because it's done in a quite rigorous way, breaking down the different steps and also going into the details. So overall, we didn't really have any element which should be changed or elements which should be added. There was, however, this idea that it might be a bit frightening when you look at it from the outset, because it's a lot of points. Of course, we all work on cross-border cooperation and we know they all make sense. But for someone who is in a region and who wants to do it for the first time, it may look a bit frightening. How to address that? Maybe by providing examples. I know it's a bit contradictory because if you add examples to that, you add a level of complexity, but maybe just a bit more concrete elements under the main points, like on the funding, for example, to say what are the different options. There was the point also to say that often those who want to start a cross-border cooperation, in general, they know already quite a bit, because if you want to cooperate with your neighbor, well, surely you already started to think about it a couple of years ago. And it's true that it might be quite rare, the cases where a region would start from zero to start a cross-border cooperation. But the main message here is that the tool is overall complete. One element which triggered some discussion, because it's really important, is the mapping of what already exists, because it's true that very often many things exist already. Not always formalized. There might be informal cooperation systems like NGOs which already cooperate across the border, like schools which have pupils from each side of the border and who may have an experience in terms of cross-border education. So the mapping is indeed something which is crucial. Involving a wide range of stakeholders and citizens in the establishment of the cross-border body is also very important. It's important to be open to their ideas. They may have additional ideas to those from the public authorities. Another element which we discussed is the fact that the tool, and from our point of view in the Commission, we very much welcome that, but the tool drives a bit the reader towards the constitution of an EGTC. Whilst in reality, there might be different options, which might be lighter, and you may have different steps before you end up into an EGTC. Regarding the last point, which is more about the functioning of the body, there was the idea maybe to have a rotating presidency. It has pros and cons, but obviously it forces the members to be quite responsible, because as they know that they will be in charge of the body at some stage, they need also to act responsibly. Also, obviously, if you have this body, it's important to have a benchmark, so to look at what is around, to look at different bodies and how they function, to be sure that you take the best out of what already exists. There is the idea also that once you set up rules, it's important to be compliant with these rules. If the rules are decided by an assembly, for example, you need during implementation to recall that the rules have to be followed. And the last point, which is more a small point really, but in terms of improving the tool, we thought that two parts could be merged. I indicated them on the paper. It's the parts about the regular review of the functioning. It appears in two sections, and here maybe they could be merged. But overall, for us, the tool is very complete. It addresses well the different elements, and above all, it's quite logical in the different steps to be followed.
For being very comprehensive. It is a tension, I think, that we have to grapple with this tool. That on the one hand, it shouldn't be off-putting because of its size. I think that also requires thinking about how do you make it, how do you give, in a way, sort of a guideline on how to use it. It's not to be used for, like, a policymaker needs to read from page 1 to page 50 and think about all the actions. There may just be one development area to look at first, so 2-3 pages, which already makes it more manageable. And also, how much detail do we put in the actions? Do we want to be putting too much detail? May look like we are prescribing too much, or it may look like, oh, this is even more overwhelming. At the same time, we do want to have that nuance there. So this is a balance that we need to cover. Just to comment on the examples, I think it's a really important one. What we will do is that the tool will be part of this final analytical report. That can be used separately, but the analytical report will include practical examples based on all these elements. So there's the analysis and examples from the 5 pilot regions, but also beyond. And then there's the analytical tool to support that. Okay, with that said, coming to group 2, I think the same tension in terms of, okay, several elements here are good, are useful, but there are several steps. Sorry, we're talking about strategic planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. One of the key elements was a mapping, a clear identification when you embark upon defining your purpose for strategic planning. What are the strategic planning tools that you're using is to really build on what is already out there. Not in terms of what are the existing plans, but also identify which actors are involved. Is it at the regional level? Is it at the local level? Is it at the national level? And think about what has already been tried before. If an integrated regional development plan has been developed in previous years, but it didn't work well, that can inform your strategic planning priorities in the future. Another point that was emphasized is that the tool perhaps should highlight more the realism and focus in terms of strategic planning and implementation, that it's very clear about what can actually be achieved, what are the resources that are available, what are the actors, which are the actors that can be mobilized. We looked at service delivery. One really important comment that was made regarding service delivery is to manage the expectations of decision makers in terms of, okay, if you want, you identify a need for providing a new or more cross-border public services, do you realize what this implies in terms of what are the financial and material resources that are needed? What is the political support that needs to be provided not only at the start, but also over a longer period of time to ensure that it's not a project, but is actual public services being provided. And then finally, to round it up, there was much more, but in the interest of time, we talked about monitoring and evaluation and the emphasis on the need to enhance the comparability of data and what cross-border initiatives can do to map what is out there, and to work together to make data on both sides of the border more compatible for users for policymakers to use that. So these are elements among several that we'll need to emphasize more. So thank you.
So I'll pick up for group 3, and I'd like to thank my group for a very active conversation with a lot of very interesting points. So we were talking about funding and financing in this group. I think I have to say we didn't really talk about whether or not this hits the mark or doesn't, but we had a lot of very good ideas. I think one of the things that came up was an important one. The fact that sometimes before you can talk about funding and financing, you need to talk about the rules that surround it, the legislation that makes things possible. And a point that was made that we have not looked at, but we will probably definitely make a comment about, is what happens if you are an EGTC on a border with also a non-member state. Because you can do certain things in funding and financing, but it may not necessarily work or be relevant to, or the non-member state cannot necessarily engage. So there are some parameter issues there. I think points that came out that people really agreed with on the first goal about ensuring stable funding for the organization itself was doing a needs assessment and identifying different sources of funding and financing. What came out here that we are missing is that we talk a lot about making sure that there is funding for staff, but not sufficiently explicit on funding for other operational things that are actually very expensive, such as events and missions and travel and all of the other bits that go into the operation that are often hidden, that we don't necessarily see or talk much about. I'm going to be a little bit quick here as well. So clarification of fiscal legislation is important with the funding and the financing. What was also very interesting, which is going to take me to the next point about funding and financing for projects, was the experience in Hungary of the EGTCs. First, there's a national fund, if I get this correctly, there's a national fund set aside for EGTCs that they can tap into it, but it's performance-based. So there are indicators on performance, and they can have access to these funds. The Hungarian EGTCs also actually use, I think it was ERDF or structural funds, for supporting projects, but through that they can also pay staff. So they have revenue raising capacity. They're a little bit like regional development agencies. So that not only supports some of the longer term capacity, but also the project capacity. One of the things that came up that needs to be considered, for example, is potentially the next generation of funding, and also the difficulties with accessing EU funds that are non-managed, like the Horizon, because you also need the external experts to do this. So what this also shows us is that funding and financing is, we know it's complex, but it's also highly, highly nuanced. A couple of ideas came out. I like that our group was very solution-oriented. So one of the ideas was making sure that members, or trying to bring members to a point where they agree to pay a certain amount for operations over a defined period of time. And that can depend on where you are in Europe. So it may be higher in Western Europe than in Eastern Europe, but to go into it knowing that there's going to be a budget allocation. So the multi-year budget planning became really quite important. The other move to a solution was either using existing platforms or an online platform, something that becomes a resource for EGTCs and other cross-border bodies to know where they can go for funding and what they may be eligible for and what they can tap into. So I will leave it at that, and I'm going to pass the microphone to my colleague, Jeff, for the last wrap-up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Verinia. So we had a very rich, high-octane discussion, sort of merging, I think, some very tangible elements and some high-flowing sort of conceptual elements. And we also discussed the two development areas, political support for cross-border cooperation and cross-border promotion, interchangeably. There was a sort of fluidity to the discussion. So I'm going to focus on a few of the points that we talked about. One is the need to simplify a lot of the processes around cross-border cooperation for politicians, be it the functioning of an EGTC, be it Interreg, the need to make them very tangible with visible actions and added value. We talked about how, for example, the benefits and the sort of cultural affiliation to cross-border unity depends very strongly on the region. You have some EGTCs that see cross-border cooperation through a primarily instrumental lens, and you have others with a deep historical memory, shared cultural links, and the need to target approaches accordingly. So it's not just about, I think as we know in our tool, it's not just about identifying development challenges. It's about thinking who is the audience that we're trying to convey the message to here. That was one point. Another point, we talked a lot about citizen engagement and the need to not just develop an informational briefing package for newly elected politicians, but there to be sort of constant face-to-face communication as well. The need to use citizen channels and tools promoted by the EU, like Europe Direct, which can put you directly in contact with citizens. And we also talked a lot about the value of cultural exchange in generating cross-border identity. I mean, we had a few ideas, but our Luxembourg colleagues talked about how they have culture and football meets once a week. We talked about the value of using citizen forums in a very instrumental way to mobilize politicians and say, this is what we think we should do, can we do it? And sort of be the pourparleur between local residents and politicians. So I think I'll stop there. There was a lot more, but that was the crux of our conversation.
Is there anybody who would like to comment on this? Is there a particular element that you think we missed in our reporting back? Or you think I should really say this before we all go? No? Okay. I think then we would like to just say a few words about next steps, as already mentioned yesterday during the presentation. Great, it is on recap of discussion next step. Let me focus on next steps in the interest of time. What we'll do is work with the comments and the suggestions and the ideas that you have provided. They are incredibly well received, and we thank you so much for the richness in this already short discussion. We also really welcome comments that you may have not been able to provide, because obviously you only had chance to look at a certain part. If you are so inclined, please feel free to share your comments and ideas over the next days or weeks. The final version of the tool will be presented as part of our final report at the end of November, beginning of December. But I don't think the conversation stops at that, because it's not about just having a tool out there, it is about the use. So we'll also carefully think about what are the mechanisms through which this tool can be disseminated over the coming in the coming period. A link to that, I would just like to reiterate the fact that on the 25th of November we'll be organizing a international dialogue event to open up this discussion for non-EU member countries, because I think there's quite a lot of richness and experiences that can help this discussion to drive it forward. And also, I think there are elements in the tool that can definitely be worth for them. Before I think handing the floor to Olivier, if you would have a few final questions, I would just really like to thank you all very much for being with us. This has been an incredibly rich event for us. We were not obviously, you never know how things go, but I think the level of engagement has been incredible. Thank you very much to the interpreters and the technical team and WM8 and the Commission for making all of this possible and bearing with us.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks to all of you who attended the conference. It was really great to have these discussions. Again, thanks very much to the OECD. We believe it's really something very useful. We enjoyed working with you. That was very nice. I hope you will also find the tool useful. For us, it really has a lot of potential. This work and the tool will be promoted by the OECD, I'm sure, but also by us. We will promote it internally within Regio. We will promote it within the Commission, and we will promote it with the border regions we are working with. So that we will do. We are also thinking about ways to continue the support for the border regions who want to have cross-border governance. So we advise you really to stay tuned on the Border Focal Point website. There may be some things coming up in the coming weeks or months. This is really an important topic for us. So thank you very much again, and have a good trip back home, and see you next time. Thank you.